Dear contestants and participants of the IEO 2021, I am welcoming you to the lecture that we're having within the IEO 2021 educational event. The theme is Introduction to Sustainability, and I am honored to welcome Mr. Janis Ozolins. He is the head of the corporate banking at the SEB Bank. SEB Bank is one of the Latvia's largest banks. It is also a partner to the University of Latvia, this year's host organization of the IEO 2021. And he is gonna present you a lecture on sustainability. So Mr. Janis Ozolins, I will give the word to you.
Thank you for the nice introduction. We'll share my screen in a second. So I hope you see my slide. So once more, truly honored to speak today in front of such international audience. It would be great to see you all in person, but it is what it is. We need to adjust to the changing times and the existing situation. As it was mentioned, I work in SEB Latvia, where I'm heading the client coverage and real estate financing departments. So not the scientist, not an environmental expert. I work with largest Latvian and Baltic customers to ensure their financing needs and daily banking needs. So as I'm speaking today on the topic of sustainability, it just proves how important this topic is for everyone and basically in every industry. I truly believe that if you still have not made your minds on your career decisions in the future, so keep in mind that sustainability definitely is the area which will become even more demanded in the future. So keep this in mind. Sustainability itself, it's a huge topic, so it's extremely complicated to give you a full picture in such a short time, but I hope that during my lecture, I'll be able to give you some concepts and ideas you can find useful in the future. And one more reason why you should pay attention to what I'm saying is that I have heard that there will be a special award for the team which will come up with the most sustainable business case solution. So let's begin. What does sustainability mean? Many would say that it's a good question and it's often very hard to explain what it is. But if we go deeper, then it basically means that it's all good things we know, but often can't describe in words. And being sustainable really makes sense. And my favorite definition of sustainability is acting in a way as if we plan to stay. So it takes into account the long-term context and perspective, not only the short-term. And another analogy I like to use is being a good neighbor. Imagine that you live in a multi-apartment complex with some 200 or 300 apartments. Some of your neighbors might make some loud noises. Some might leave their car in your parking lot. Some may burn their dinner on a daily basis. So they're not maybe considered as really good neighbors, right? To be a good neighbor, you need to take into account interest of other stakeholders, meaning other neighbors. And it's good to have a good relationship with as many neighbors as possible. And the same goes about sustainability. It's good and others appreciate it as well. So, but if we look into the standard definition, most of you most probably have heard different abbreviations like ESG, CS, CSR, but in general, it means basically the same. And the standard definition is ESG, or environment. E stands for environment, S stands for social aspects, and G stands for the governance. And actually, it's our common agenda to be sustainable, and it's not something new. Back in 2015, United Nations developed 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they're called, to help companies and individuals to navigate the sustainability topic. You can find a lot of info on these SDGs on the web, so I'll not go too deep in these, but the general idea for the companies is that they usually pick some 4 or 5 goals which they have the biggest impact on, and then they report on their actions, plans, and progress, how they achieve their goals. You can find also some tools on the web which actually help companies after solving some questionnaires, which are the most meaningful sustainability goals for them. So it's also kind of work in progress, and you can find the most meaningful goals for each company as well. Another important document you need to keep in mind is the Paris Agreement, which sets an ambition to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% until 2030 and by 100% by 2050. And as 2030 is not too distant future, and actually 50% cut in emissions is a lot, so it means that companies need to act already now. But today I'll put a bit more focus on the E letter of the ESG and ESG definition and look more on the environmental aspects. So one thing which you need to also, one concept thing you need to keep in mind is called linear thinking. Sometimes it's also called cradle to grave thinking. It means that you take something from the grave, the raw material from the nature, then you produce and you basically dispose or burn everything what's left. You put it into the grave. And actually it's also dating back pretty long time ago. It was 17th century when the steam engine was invented, and it changed everything. This invention kickstarted the Industrial Revolution, which transformed our ability to make things. Raw materials and energy were seemingly infinite, and labor was readily available. For the first time in history, goods were mass-produced. So we could push the pedal to the metal, take as much materials as we want, produce them, and just dispose or burn everything what's left at the end. Of course, it has resulted in some good things because now the products from all over the world are available to us at affordable prices, but it also has some consequences. And one fact from the textile industry is that actually every second an equivalent of one garbage truck of textiles is landfilled or burned. So, which does not seem an efficient way to how to use resources, right? And as we go deeper into the CS area, I would like to mention some of the key concepts, and they're called market failures. And one of the market failures is called tragedy of commons. It was an ecologist, Garrett Harding, who in his research looked back in the colonial times when the cities only were developed, and between the cities there was land which could be used for the farmers, for example, to breed sheep, as you see in the pictures. And this concept highlights the conflict between individual and collective rationality. When the field is not over capacity, it is not used as over capacity, ranchers may graze their animals with few limitations. So as you see in the first pictures, there is a field of the land and there are a couple of sheep. So the sheep is healthy, the wool is good, and everyone benefits. But of course, every rational rancher will seek to add livestock to increase their profits. And you see in the following pictures that basically the more sheep you add, the natural resources get depleted, and which has the negative cost for all other farmers. This scenario is played out on a daily basis in numerous instances, having a grave consequences on the world's resources, air, land, water, and the like. And as the population is growing and keeps growing, the more resources we are using and the less collective resources left for all of us. Another concept I believe is important for you, it's called externality. It's a cost or benefit of a good that is not included in the purchase price of the good or the product. And here you can see the pack of chewing gum. When I was studying in the elementary school, after the school year, we had to clean our classrooms. And it also included scraping off the chewing gums from underneath the tables. And at that time, I didn't know that there is a specific name for this phenomenon, but already then I started to think, why do I have to spend my time and energy to scrape off the chewing gum somebody else has put there? And it's true, the price of the chewing gum does not include the cost occurred by somebody else cleaning it up. And as it has been a summer, most of us have spent some good time near the waters, whether it's sea or some lake or pond. When we arrive at the beach, most probably we can see some plastic straws, plastic bags. Maybe there is a seaweed which doesn't smell nice. Maybe the water is not so clear. And of course, basically all of us going to rest for the beach, we are having the cost, and we are basically paying for actions which has been done by some company polluting the rivers which flow into the sea, causing eutrophication. And of course, it also has much broader consequences for the environment. And similar analogy applies to the climate change. As you can see in the bottom of the slides, there are several ways how governments actually have tried to tackle this issue. One is called command control regulation, which basically puts a certain limit on the emissions or pollutants, noise or odors, or whatever the limit might be put on. If you breach the limit, basically you pay the fine. So we can see that it's already working for a while. Another way how governments have tried to control that is putting taxes. There's a special tax for packaging. There is excise tax for fuel, for diesel, for alcohol and tobacco products, which basically are not giving total benefit to the whole society. And then there is this cap and trade system. And in Europe, we have this emission trading scheme. So basically, the biggest polluters, the biggest polluting companies are given the quota of the CO2 emissions they can emit. If they breach that limit, they need to buy those emissions from the other companies or from the market. If they don't use all their permits, they can sell those permits to others. So basically, it incentivizes the company with the lower polluters to be less polluting even more, so they can gain financial benefit. And if we look at the CO2 quota prices, then we can see that they have been growing for a while already. And as we will see in the next slides, even the governments have tried to control this pollution and the climate change. We have been pretty bad at it. And it has led us to the climate change. And to be honest, actually, this is the most urgent change necessary, and everyone needs to take action on this one. We see that global warming is not distributed equally around the planet, but we see that still it's on average 1 degree Celsius, and in some regions it's even 4 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. And of course, it has very negative consequences. As you see in the picture, we hear in the news a lot about wildfires in the forests in the US, in Australia, and also in Europe. Those living to the next to the Baltic Sea, I believe this year we have seen climate which is more similar to Mediterranean Sea climate. There has been huge flooding in Europe this year. So basically, these are some of the consequences. And of course, if you look at the temperature rising also, then since the mid 1980s, Arctic surface air temperatures have warmed at least twice as fast as the global average, while the sea ice, the Greenland ice sheet, and glaciers have declined over the same period, and permafrost temperatures have increased. So, thing we need to do is to stop erosion of critical ecosystems, because it might cause even more extreme weather events, sea level rising, glacier shrinking, and ocean acidification, and other things like that. Climate change is already impacting both climate and nature. And what you see in this chart is a temperature difference from pre-industrial conditions based on 5 different data sets. And as you can see, that all data sets basically tell the same story, that 2020 has been one of the 3 warmest years on record we have had. And it's worth noting that the Paris Agreement aims to hold the global average temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. There was a hope when the COVID hit that the emissions will go down and the climate and the nature will be able to recover a bit. Emissions really dropped by 17% back to the 2006 levels, but basically it had no effect on the global warming. So one thing we could consider is to push the stop button and close all the factories and stores, basically to give some time for the nature to recover. But of course, it's not an option. We still need to go to work. We need to produce something. We need to eat something. So we need to think about something else. And the thing we need to keep in mind is that we need to shift our economy to meet the needs of all within the capacity of our planet, to use the planetary boundaries, and we need to understand what are the planetary boundaries. And actually, our generations are the ones which can make or break the sustainability transformation. When we talk about the climate change in numbers, then there are a couple of numbers you need to kind of be aware of. The atmospheric CO2 levels are used as particles per million, which you can see in the graph as well. And there are 4 figures I would say it's important for you to know: 350, 450, 550, and 419. The 315 particles of CO2 in the atmosphere has been pre-industrial levels at which the civilization developed and is known for basically all living creatures. 450 sets the 2-degree benchmark, which is also a reference point in the Paris Agreement. It means that there will be more extreme weather events, sea levels will rise, but it's also kind of general compromise way what can be politically agreed and can be economically achieved as well. Then there is 550, which basically is the upper boundary or the tipping point. And if it's reached, then it could have devastating and irreversible consequences on the nature and the climate, and of course, all of us. And 419, basically, it's the actual figure in July from Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which is actually used as a golden standard for the CO2 measurements. And if you look at the chart, we can see that the CO2 levels have been rising in the atmosphere already since the 1960s. And actually, with the years, the growth has become even faster and higher. And it really means that if you look at the previous growth rates, that we have some 10 years, maybe less 10 years to kind of stick below this 450, which sets this 2-degree benchmark. So definitely it seems we have been doing something, but we're not doing enough. So we need to change the way we think and we do things. So what if we don't act? As you see in the pictures, there's a bit of drama. And of course, there are a lot of risks and a lot of things might be impacted if we don't take action now or very soon. There can be the rising atmospheric CO2 concentrations might lead to cascading effects that contribute to high impact events, risking the achievement of the sustainability development goals I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. It might lead to human mobility and displacement. And actually, if you look at the data, then over the past decade, weather-related events has triggered an estimated 23.1 million displacements of people on average each year. And if you look also on the recent data, then approximately 9.8 million displacements, largely due to hydrometeorological hazards and disasters, were recorded during the first half of 2020 alone. Of course, it might put also pressure on the food security, because in 2020, over 50 million people were doubly hit by climate-related disasters, floods, droughts, and storms, and also by the COVID-19 pandemic. And nearly 690 million people, or 9% of the world population, were undernourished. And of course, if this happens, if people don't have access to the food to work, they will try to migrate to places where they can get food, grow food, and also be employed. And it means that also in the future it could cause some local or social unrest between the people and maybe even between the nations. So that's also a very important thing we need to keep in the mind. So what do we have to do? I like the way that Bill Gates put in his book called How to Avoid Climate Disaster. And actually, it's a good read suggestion for all of you. Basically, we need to change the way how we make things, cement, steel, plastics, how we plug in, how we produce electricity, how we grow plants and animals, how we get around, whether it's planes, trucks, cargo ships, and how we keep warm and cool, basically heating, cooling, and refrigeration. And in order to reach the climate goals, there needs to be 51 billion CO2 tons reduction in these segments. And in the brackets, you can see the figure, which part is, how much is responsible for this CO2 production. So, of course, electricity production and how we produce other things, it's very important. So also, there's a lot of talk and debate about the greenhouse gases and the CO2. But actually, if you look a bit deeper, then the CO2 is not the only gas. If we consider all the greenhouse gas emissions, then there actually are several, which you can see on the top of the picture. But what's important for the companies is actually that they need to establish between these emissions. There is scope 1 emissions, which are direct emissions. And these are produced by the facilities and equipment which is directly owned by the company. So that's why it's called direct emissions. And also the companies have direct impact on those. Then there's scope 2 emissions, which are indirect emissions, but these are kind of emissions produced while purchasing electricity, steam, heating, or cooling. So it also takes into account the kind of way how the electricity or the heating has been generated, whether it's coal, whether it's fossil fuel, whether it's renewables, wind, or power. And then there is kind of the biggest biggest challenge is to understand the scope 3 emissions, because these are indirect emissions. These are formed the upstream activities, which means basically it takes into account emissions which are created while the products and raw materials enter your company or your kind of manufacturing plant. But the downstream activities, they take into account emissions which are kind of created after the product leaves the production facility of your company. And it includes all basically the life cycle assessment. If you are selling your product to other companies, you're responsible for their scope 3 emissions. And already now we see a trend that if you want to sell your goods or products to international companies, you need to have answers on what CO2 impact does your company have and what future plans do you have to minimize these effects. And this is not maybe a norm in the whole world, but we see that especially in Nordics and Central Europe, companies are kind of paying even more and more attention towards this. So what could be the answer? And in one of the first slides, I told you about this cradle to grave system, but which were linear thinking. And here's a better concept from the sustainability perspective. It's called circular thinking, or sometimes it's also called cradle to cradle. So there's no grave in the definition. So you basically create a closed loop system that you need to take as less raw materials from the nature and environment as possible. So in practice, it works like that you of course, you will need some raw material, but you need to also you need to spend time to make analysis on your supply chain. How sustainable are your suppliers? Then you need to pay attention on your manufacturing processes. How efficient are your facilities? What do you do with the byproducts? And can something be reused? Then you need to take into account logistics. It's how you ship and how far do you need to ship your product, whether you ship it by diesel ships or whether it's electrical vehicles or planes. So it also plays important role on the total CO2 emissions of the company. Then you need to look also in the sales perspective, how energy efficient are those stores you sell your products, and also how you market your products, how you also educate your consumers, how good is your product. And then there is also use phase. You need to pay attention how much energy or resources your product is spending during its use phase. And easy thing is to think about electronical appliances. If it's more energy efficient, it will use less resources. But of course, if you look on the other industries as well, the innovation is taking place there. Companies which are operating in textile industry try to create fabrics which can be washed in lower temperatures, are more durable, so they can be used even more often and more heavily. Detergent production companies try to think of the solutions that these detergents become more effective at lower temperatures. So there's a constant innovation going on. And of course, when the product is used, you need to think about recycling. What's the possibility? How the product can be recycled, or can it be used as a raw material for some other company? So at the end, the idea is to take as less raw materials from the nature as possible, but use everything what we have compared to putting everything in the landfill or just burning it down. So it's a bit of the theory might be a bit of complicated, but it's always better that if we have some good examples and practical examples from the international companies. And one thing you need to pay attention to is it's called green design principles. So one thing is that basically it's called dematerialize. Make products with the lowest impact you can during their consumer phase. And in the picture, you can see example of Apple and the development of Macintosh or MacBook. And of course, if you see from the pictures and the latest generations of the Macintosh are much lighter. It means if the product is lighter, you can more easily ship it. You will have it's smaller. You will have to use less trucks or ships to ship your product. And of course, if we look also on this energy efficiencies and the latest generation appliances, they use much less energy during its use phase. And of course, Apple is also a good example how you can see how the batteries or for the phones have evolved over the time, becoming more powerful. So that's also good idea where you can you should keep in your mind. Another thing from the automobile industry, you need to make things more efficient. And cars has been example where if you recall some time ago, there were 4, 5, 6 liter diesel engines, but now actually the companies are creating engines 1 liter, 1.5 liter, or even electrical vehicles. And of course, the torque and the horsepowers and the efficiency has improved a lot. And it means that you also need to pay attention towards the upgrading the facilities. And many of you have heard about this lean concept. So this is also one thing that you need to keep in mind when thinking of your business ideas. Another idea is to make products more useful. And whether it's Samsung or any other smartphone you have, just imagine how actually different appliances it includes in one item. So you have a camera, you have a TV, you have a music player, you have a notebook, you have basically a computer in one item. And just if you imagine how many resources and material should be used to produce each of these items, which are replaced with one app on your phone. Then, of course, this also shows that that these kind of multi-use products are really appreciated from the sustainability perspective. Another thing is that you should consider to using recycled materials and make use of old materials as much as possible. One example is H&M operating in this textile industry, and they actually have committed that until 2025 they will use at least 30% of recyclable materials. That's one way how you can kind of do that, but also you can look for synergies with other companies. And there's also kind of big hype on the second-hand clothes sales. There's a company ThreadUp in the United States which basically sells second-hand clothes which are bought for somebody else. So it gives money to the seller, and it also kind of creates business for the new business idea. Also in Latvia, we have a kind of non-alcoholic beverage producer, which is making lemonades of different tastes. And of course, to make lemonades of different tastes, you need also have some different berries. So they understood and had kind of set up a partnership with a company which produces fruit candy. The kind of byproducts of the candy actually can become as a raw material for this drink manufacturer. So this is kind of a very good synergy, as that waste of the one company becomes the raw material of the other. So that's also one thing you can consider and keep in mind. Then also modular design. So when you set up a product, please to kind of take into account that assembly and recycling is easier. And here you can see an example of the carpet tiles produced by Interface. And as most of you have been in the office buildings, you'll see that there is a carpet mostly on the floor. And the interface, actually, if you look deeper into on the floors, then you can see that it's not one sheet of the carpet. It's kind of it consists from separate tiles. And when the tiles get worn out, where there's a higher footfall in the office, you don't need to change the full carpet. You just change the tiles which are worn out. And also in the US, the interface has this take back programs. That they take back the old used tiles and use it as a raw material for production of new tiles. And also one thing you kind of can take into account is that you should use fewer different materials to make things recyclable, because the problem nowadays is that many products consist of different separate product kind of materials, and in order to recycle those materials properly, you need to kind of separate them. But that's an issue for many kind of products. So one example is Adidas, which have created this Futurecraft loop. And basically, it's a transformative approach to designing shoes that are made to be remade from the one outset using only one material and no glue. So it means that this shoe is easily recyclable in the future. And one more thing you kind of can take into account is to let your customers know the good things you are doing. So there are a lot of labels and certifications you can use. And it's also a good way how to kind of explain your clients that your products are using less energy, or that the materials that it uses come from legitimate sources, or that the product can be easily recycled. The problem is that there are kind of too many labels, maybe because there are several labels in each country, I believe. And for the consumer, it's pretty hard to navigate through that. And we have kind of heard or seen a lot of examples of so-called greenwashing. Now it has become very trendy that you put bio, eco, or green in front of the name of your product, and you sell it as a green, but actually it's maybe not so green. So to make this kind of labels and certifications tangible, you need to kind of keep in mind that a couple of things needs to be true. First of all, it should be expensive for bad products to get the labels, and second, there should be some kind of penalty for the cheating, and there should be some constant audit from those certification companies. And of course, another way how you can promote sustainability in your organization is to use product take back. And the excellent example here is IKEA, which also offers to repurchase the old furniture from you, so you get some credit and you can change to the new furniture. And also one cheap way how to let your customers know what you're doing in sustainability area is to use the company's webpage. So you need to basically tell the story there, use some facts and figures. What are your challenges? What are you doing? And what are your targets? And what are your achievements? If the company grows bigger, then most probably this kind of not printed, but sustainability report on some 20, maybe 50 pages also becomes an essence, because investors and the consumers start to pay to this even more and more attention. So as I work in a bank, also maybe question, how do banks get involved? If you look at the banks, then basically our direct impact is only 5%. We sit in the offices, we have a couple of company cars, we print some things, but more or less that's it. The biggest impact from the banking perspective comes through the offerings, through the loans we finance, through the leasings we issue, and what kind of projects we finance. And of course, we are the kind of main stakeholders that has a key to drive the change at the scale. And of course, in order to reach all those sustainability targets and CO2 reduction targets, a lot of money will be needed. And it has been estimated that in Europe, for the next 10 years, the estimated investment needs will be around 350 billion euros per year for energy systems alone. An additional 130 billion euros will be needed to achieve other environmental goals as well. So it means roughly 500 billion euros a year for the next 10 years needs to be invested. And of course, if you look at the public finance, then most probably we all understand that a lot of money will come also from the banks. And everyone understands that. So there is also regulation coming not only on the banks, but also on general investors, that we need to report how green are our products, how green are our clients, and how green are our portfolio. And most probably there are some kind of skeptics among you that you can say that everyone is talking about it, but nobody is actually doing a thing. It's not true. And to prove the fact, here actually you can see the cumulative annual sustainable debt issuance. And sustainable debt means that the goal, or kind of the purpose of the loan, has been to finance sustainable projects, sustainable activities, which help companies and kind of the world itself to reach those emission reduction targets. And you see it has developed a lot, and especially in 2021. If you look at the figure for the first 6 months this year, the total debt issued has reached 761 billion US dollars, and it's more than in last year, full last year. And of course, you see also the figures from 2016, when the kind of sustainable debt issuance it's in a kind of early stage. And it's expected that given the huge capex investments needed, this sustainable debt will grow. And also, if you're setting up the company, if you will want to attract the financing, whether it's a bank, whether it's investor, whether it's investment fund, you will need to have answers how sustainable your company is. And maybe to conclude, there are a lot of good things why companies should be sustainable. One comes as risk management, because if you look at the most valued brands or companies in the world, a lot of value comes from the brand value itself. And of course, if the company is involved in some kind of sustainability scandals or breaches, then the value goes down, and it has negative effect on investors and also, of course, on everyone else. Also, if the company is paying attention to sustainability, we can truly say that it's expected the regulatory management and environment will become more harsher on this topic in the future. So if you're taking steps now, you're better prepared for the future. Another thing, which is kind of why it's good to be a sustainable company, it's growth phase. And as you saw in the examples, actually, the sustainability drives innovation. So you can create new products. So you can also reach new customers, because especially if you look at the younger generations, then they pay more and more attention towards how sustainable the company is and how sustainable the product is. And also, when you're trying to recruit new young talents, then we hear also from our interns and our new recruits that it's impossible. That's very important for them that the company is sustainable they are working in. And another thing, of course, there's a lot of research being done, and basically it was proven that sustainable companies have higher returns on capital, which of course is good for if you're a shareholder or owner of the company. Because also one thing is that customers are ready to pay some green premium for the sustainable products. It depends on the industry and on the product and the market, but it's been proven that there is some green premium. So it means that you can price your sustainable products a bit higher. Also, it has been proven that in mergers and acquisitions, the buyers are ready to pay a bit higher premium for sustainable companies compared to non-sustainable companies. And of course, if you're sustainable and you kind of use less raw resources, it means that you also need to buy less resources. And it also has a positive effect on your profit and loss statement. And I would say that was a quick intro onto this topic, and I hope you have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Janis. And we really do have 2 questions. I will start with the first one. Do you feel like the mitigation of climate risks to avoid incurring financial damages is enough of an incentive for investors to utilize sustainable investments?
Okay, that's I will read myself once more. So I would say that's not the only incentive that you could kind of pay attention towards this financial damages. It's not enough, definitely. And as I mentioned in the beginning, being a good company, it's you need to do good things. Of course, if you kind of reduce the financial damage, it's a good thing. But anyways, there are much, as I mentioned, there is better returns on capital. It drives innovation, and it also kind of helps the world itself to maybe reduce inequalities and become a better place to live.
Thank you. The next question is, in terms of slowing down climate change by limiting emissions to reach the 2-degree target, that was an explanation to the first question.
Okay, but basically, I believe I have covered it. It's the financial damage is not the only thing we need to pay attention to. It's creating a world for next generations to stay.
Do you expect greenwashing and whitewashing to become more or less common in the future?
I would say now it's a mess. Also, if we compare different markets, and there's different kind of approach towards this greenwashing or kind of whitewashing. I know that as I mentioned, it's trendy to call the products or I know investment funds that they are green. But of course, a lot of more regulation needs to be done. And I know that in EU, European Commission and European Union is working on also kind of green eco labels and to avoid this greenwashing. So basically, there needs to be international criteria set. What can you call green, eco, or bio in order to kind of avoid this greenwashing? Because if now, if more definitions on kind of green, eco, or bio, or sustainable are there's much more bigger confusion. So I would say that in the future, the governments and the public authorities will do as much as possible to avoid this greenwashing. And one also practical example, now we see in the Baltics, there is a product called green leasing. And it's called the same way by different banks, but actually what it means, it's different by different banks. One bank might call green leasing only for cars which are fully electrical. Some banks might include also hybrid vehicles, and some banks might include also kind of gas or diesel cars with low emission numbers. So there's a lot of variety and approaches to the definitions, and we need to clear it up to avoid this greenwashing in the future.
And could you also please explain the concepts between greenwashing and whitewashing for those who are not informed?
I'm more familiar with greenwashing, but whitewashing, maybe the person who gave asked the question can help me a bit as well.
Okay, so what else could banks do to promote sustainability?
So it's a lot. We are taking active stance, also kind of educating our employees and trying to incorporate sustainable practices in our offices as well. Paying attention to energy efficiency of our buildings, paying attention how CO2 emissions our car fleet is emitting. We also kind of go to the schools and promote these things. And also, there's a kind of lot of work being done in work with public authorities and the public sector that we also work together as a team, because I would say honestly that everyone is only in a learning phase as of now. So a lot of work is being done there. Banks are also setting up these kind of green products, promoting green bonds, and also, of course, as our clients, we have a huge client base, and I would say every bank also talks about on sustainability with all of our clients. So that's how the banks do put the impact.
Okay. A question from India. When we look at companies that are based on non-sustainable operations, which produce goods which are by definition polluting, like oil companies, how do you think they can make themselves more sustainable?
So well, for oil companies, it's a big challenge, and there's also recently article in the Guardian that actually Standard and Poor's, the rating agency, has warned biggest oil companies that their credit ratings will be downgraded because these renewable energy is coming into the force. So of course there are some industries which are non-sustainable, and it will be extremely big challenge for them. And we see that already now some action is taking place. For example, there was, if I recall correctly, then it was ExxonMobil, where only kind of the investor which owned only 2% of the company managed to change the full management board of the company, because they started this kind of dialogue with them that the owners of the company doesn't believe that they're doing enough to be sustainable. And it was yesterday I read that Philip Morris, the tobacco product producer, is aiming not to produce cigarettes anymore in the future. So of course you need to be very careful when you listen what those companies in these segments say. But they they kind of will face significant transformation, and I believe that many of them might also kind of cease to exist, or there might be some kind of consolidation in that phase.
And Szymon Florek from Poland is explaining the whitewashing, that it is faking the social issue, while greenwashing is usually connected to the environmental aspects. So the greenwashing is faking the environmental issues then. And we go on to the next question. Is it harder?
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. So is it harder for smaller firms to achieve these goals? If it is, how can they contribute to reducing emissions?
I would say that we are having dialogues on a daily basis with our clients, and I would kind of split the clients in several categories, as we are working in Baltics, and of course we're also not kind of the biggest economy. We don't have the biggest companies from the kind of world perspective. But I would say those companies which are owned by foreign capital, they are doing a lot and making the first steps to achieve the sustainability goals. Then there are local companies, but which are exporting their goods to Nordics, to Europe, to US, and basically their customers are also demanding that those companies become sustainable. But of course, the bigger problem is the SMEs, or small and medium enterprises, because of course I would say there's not kind of clear guidelines what they need to do, how to achieve those goals, how actually to calculate their environmental impact. But also I know that EU is working a lot to kind of make financing and kind of additional financing from the EU fundings, that it could kind of promote this transition towards sustainability. Because now a lot of kind of focus is on the companies which are already green now, but there is lacking the support for the companies which are in transition. And of course, for companies to understand what they can do, is they need to understand their CO2 footprint. It depends on the industry. For some companies, it might be kind of you need to kind of check your electricity bills, heating bills, maybe make an assumption what would happen with your bills if you renovate or make this building more energy efficient. If you would switch to newer equipment, which is more efficient. So those are the things you can affect, kind of have impact. And of course, talk to your suppliers, ask what's their input, and also, as I mentioned, think of the green design and think how your products can be recycled in the future.
Thank you. And a question from Mateusz Gugala from Switzerland. How effective in terms of race to the bottom is the new carbon tax ratified by the EU on the carbon emissions of companies who sell products in the EU but produce abroad, where they emit a lot of CO2?
I would say that there is also still a bit of struggle between the different parts of the world, because if in the European Union we have this emission trading scheme, then basically the companies in EU need to commit to some kind of goals and ambition. But at the same, there are companies in other parts of the world which are not subject to these directives, and of course they can produce, I know, for example, cement, which is highly CO2 intensive. Companies in EU need to commit to some specific standard and continue to work improvement the facilities, which of course increases the price of the product as well because it's R&D and it's more expensive. But at the same time, there are companies which, I don't know, in Egypt, in Russia, maybe Belarus, which are not kind of bind to those standards. And it means that they don't pay attention to that. They can offer cheaper price to the clients. And of course, there is this kind of spillover effect. So it will be kind of the challenge how to set that. And as I also mentioned in the presentation, tax or some kind of command and control regulation is one of the way how the public sector can look at it.
Thank you. Question by Joaquim Rodriguez from Portugal. So if companies sustainability produce goods and services and then take into consideration the impact of their choice in the fight against climate change in terms of price, given consumers' ability to pay more for an eco-friendly product, aren't they internalizing an externality?
I will read once more.
Yes, it's a very specific, a very in-depth question. Thank you, Joaquim.
That's really a good question. But I would say if kind of it's of course good that you kind of tell your consumers how green is your product, and there are some kind of industries where the green premiums are not so high, so they are more available to each and every consumer. And the biggest kind of, I would say, from this green premium perspective thing the companies needs to do is everyone still needs to invest a lot in R&D to bring those green premiums down, so we will also avoid that problem. Because when the green premium, I know, for example, let's take electrical car versus kind of diesel car. The price you pay, the price you pay for electrical car is much higher, and the green, it's called kind of green premium, and it's a bit of kind of harder for people to access, even if there is kind of some state support available or that. But of course, if these green premiums, most probably those green premiums will be reduced in the future, and but it of course depends on how much companies will innovate and find better solutions how we produce things.
Thank you. So I invite all the participants and contestants of the IEO to ask their questions. So you have this great opportunity to get an in-depth expertise from Janis. So maybe I can ask a question. So what would be your advice for the contestants? What principles or daily habits could they introduce to shift towards a more sustainable living, or maybe push local economies to a more sustainable governance?
I would say you need to talk about it. You need to ask questions about it, whether it's your kind of government, public institution, whether it's a company you're going for internship. definitely if more people will talk about it, the more attention will be brought to it as well. So it would be a general good consequence as well. And of course, from kind of private perspective, definitely you can try to kind of calculate your own footprint. Maybe check a bit of more how sustainable are the products you buy to understand your impact, and maybe also try out some new ideas and new products also to kind of show that there is customer out there for companies which are doing the right things.
Yes, and we have a question from Boris in Russia. What do you think about the companies cooperating to standardize and develop technologies to support sustainability? Should it be prohibited or limited by antitrust agencies?
Well, I would say it's good that the companies are coming together and thinking in ways how become more sustainable. But of course, it makes sense because for some industries, for example, automaking industry, it's huge capex needed, and of course, if each and every company does it on itself, it's very expensive. And in this industry, we already see that the competitors are joining forces to kind of accumulate money to being spent on R&D to create the electrical vehicles. And of course, if we come together, we have bigger amounts of financing for R&D, and of course, the results are quicker and better as well. So there's less competition, and also kind of gives better incentive to the whole society and environment.
Thank you, and thank you, Boris, for the question. So you mentioned in the presentation that the two biggest impacts that we're having because of this sustainability issues is human mobility and food security. Would you comment a bit more about that? What are the industries that are more involved in tackling those problems?
I would say when it comes to the food, of course, everyone is impacted basically. And if we look at the farmers in any country, of course, we have seen kind of extreme weather events, whether it's drought, whether it's flooding, impacting the harvests of the farmers. There is some kind of state support as well in forms of subsidies to kind of compensate the damage. But of course, if there's a kind of full drought, then there is kind of less raw materials available for food producers, so they cannot make bread, pasta, and then things like that. And of course, it might increase the prices dramatically. And that's also what scientists are doing, to working on new breeds of rice, of wheat, which are kind of more sustainable. They can grow in harsher environments, harsher consequences. So there's basically sustainability everywhere on all of the sectors.
And Joachim from Portugal would like to give a more precise explanation about his question. He was asking about eco-friendly products and internalizing an externality. So he was referring to companies that expand their profit margin while changing to eco-friendly products. So if you can comment on that.
Yes, as I mentioned, there is this green premium for eco-friendly products, because a lot of money and investments will be done in research and development. And of course, if company invests some money in a new facility, new product, they need to repay this kind of investment as well. So of course, there is this economical or kind of business incentives still are there. But also, if you're the first one, definitely you can kind of charge a higher margin. And as other companies will do the same, will kind of catch you up, then those margins will shrink again. So it's also the kind of economies of scale from that perspective.
Yes, thank you. So, dear contestants, you have a few minutes left to ask your questions to Janis Ozolins. So, and we have another question. So, developing country thinks that it is not fair to decrease their pollutants because developed country has developed because of their pollutants behavior. But developing country does not has the opportunity to be developed with exploiting resources. Do this it fair?
Of course, it's always will be a question of fairness, how to actually allocate those CO2 emissions, whether it should be kind of per number of inhabitants, per GDP per capita, or things like that. And it's tricky. There is no kind of straight answer, and there has been political debate already for years how to do that. And of course, we see that there's also kind of impact to support those developing countries to get some additional funding to reach those targets, share experiences to kind of decrease those inequalities. But I agree that if you look from that perspective today, there are developed countries which are kind of creating much more CO2 emissions. But of course, it's a question whether it's fair. Maybe it's not, but this is the kind of question for mostly our generations to get an answer to.
Thank you, Janis. So we are almost finished with this lecture. I will remind you that our guest speaker was Janis Ozolins. He is the head of the corporate banking at the SEB Bank. SEB Bank is one of the Latvia's largest banks and is a partner to the University of Latvia, which this year is hosting the IEO 2021. So if there are no further questions, I would like to thank you, Janis, and we will meet in the next events of the IEO 2021. Thank you and good luck in your competitions.
Thank you. Good luck.